Welcome back to the Bulwark. I am Sam Stein, managing editor for the site, and we are joined again by Evan Roth-Smith, who graciously agreed to come back and do essentially a redo of the episode we had about a week and a half ago. Evan's with Blueprint polling venture. Last time we had him on, we talked about a poll that the firm had conducted on Kamala Harris and how voters had perceived different aspects of her biography. Well, Blueprint's out today with a similar study, but this time around Tim Walz. And so we're going to dive into that data and get some perspective on the VP candidate and why he's doing significantly better than JD Vance. So, Evan, first of all, thanks for joining us. You're here in Chicago, correct?
Yes, that's right. I'm here in Chicago. Been at the convention and managed to steal some of these "We Heart Joe" poster signs. It's been a really incredible amount of energy, and it's very fun to be here. As someone who's been working on this election now for a year, the change in the last month in how people in Democratic politics are feeling is great.
It's pretty remarkable. It's been the predominant theme in my conversations with attendees in the halls. Just people being like, 4 months ago, I was in a state of depression.
The energy around the top of the ticket is great. The events that are going on for down ballot, swing state, congressional candidates. I mean, it's amazing how some of these people feel and how people are newly confident over our ability to actually, win the House, maybe win the Senate, maybe.
Yeah. All right. So let's set the stage. Tonight's big speaker is Tim Walz. As tradition, the VP gets the penultimate night. You're out with a study today on the Minnesota governor. Let's start with the top line. Pretty popular despite a fairly sustained couple weeks of attacks from Republicans. In fact, a lot more popular than JD Vance. Tell us what the top line numbers are, and then also get into sort of how he and Vance compare.
Yeah, so the top line number on Tim Walz is that he's the most popular person on either ticket right now. He's plus 10 favorability.
Right.
JD Vance is deeply underwater. We have him very underwater right now, as most pollsters do. And we have him at JD Vance at around minus 21. We had him minus 6, minus 7 a few weeks ago. Other pollsters are seeing him all over the place. We have Walz at plus 10. So it's a 30-point difference in our numbers between the two vice presidential candidates. And most other pollsters are seeing Tim Walz somewhere between plus 5 and plus 10. But it's clear that he is additive to the ticket. He's viewed positively. The last 2 weeks of Republican attacks have not stuck, have not hurt him in any particular way. And the first rule of a vice presidential candidate is do no harm, right? Do no harm to the ticket.
Right.
JD Vance broke that rule very quickly, but Tim Walz hasn't yet. And one of the other things we looked for was, where are places where he can help, right? What are things that people might be interested to learn about Tim Walz that they don't know yet?
Before we get to Tim Walz, because I still don't really quite understand why JD Vance did so much harm. What's your reasoning for that? What happened here? Because he's unknown, he's young. In theory, he's relatively blank slate. Like, what was it about Vance that just made people recoil?
Because right out of the gate, so many Americans' first impressions of JD Vance was this guy has a problem with women.
Right.
He just doesn't seem to like women. He doesn't seem to like their place in society. He wants to pursue policies that might limit their place in society, limit their rights. And okay, of course, Democrats came out of the gate with that attack and Republicans had their opportunity to respond. JD Vance didn't do a very good job dispelling that notion, right? He was asked about his childless cat lady's comment and said, well, I've got nothing against cats, right?
I've got nothing against cats. I've got nothing against dogs.
I mean, that's how you affirm people's negative view of you, right? So he did all of this.
Yeah.
He just misplayed the first impression, right? You meet someone at an event, at a party, and you shake their hand, and you get a bad vibe, a bad energy, right? That's what the American people got from JD Vance. He just really ruined his first impression on the American people. And this election is not about the vice presidents, right? It's about Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the presidential candidates. So people are going to make up their mind very quickly about these vice presidential candidates and then turn their attention back to the top of the ticket.
Right.
JD Vance squandered that first opportunity when people were willing to hear him out, decide what they thought of him, and then start thinking again about Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And he's now got entrenched negative views.
So and he's having trouble breaking them. But let's shift back to Walz for a second, because he too was subjected to a steady stream of attacks a lot of them around his record in the Army National Guard, questions about whether he embellished it, whether he was dishonest, even about the circumstances by which he departed, whether he left the Guard in order to pursue a political career, questions about whether he inflated his rank. And yet, your poll finds that among biographical facts, the best preference effect, as in the more, and tell me if I'm getting this wrong, the detail that is more likely to change a voter's perception of the candidate in a positive direction, is the fact that he enlisted in the Army National Guard as a teenager and retired 24 years later. Explain how this has been or remains a positive element for Walz, even as it's the primary focus of the opposition against him.
It goes back to this question of how much are people really interested in hearing all that much or reading deep in detail about the vice presidential candidates, and also how much do the attacks on Tim Walz around his service connect to anything about Kamala Harris, right? People aren't really interested right now in doing a deep dive on Tim Walz's service history and, what does this form say about when he was discharged or anything like that. This election's about inflation, prices, immigration, and potentially reproductive rights. The attacks on JD Vance got to the stakes of this election, right, around reproductive rights in particular. The attacks on Tim Walz seem to have nothing to do with the stakes of this election, so voters aren't particularly interested, and they like that he was a veteran, right? In many ways, Tim Walz is what the Republicans were hoping to find in JD Vance, this sort of nice, genial, pro-consumer, pro-family, Midwestern veteran, white male, can talk to a crowd, can win working class voters, can win rural voters. This is what the Republicans thought they had in JD Vance. And instead, the Democrats have found it in Tim Walz.
Yeah. And to your point, when you look at the issue positions that have the best preference effects, many of them are really around healthcare. I mean, there's running on protecting Social Security and Medicare, a classic sort of Democratic position, plus 13 preference effect. That's the highest polling one among issues. Then you go into he's running on banning price gouging on groceries and healthcare. That's plus 11. And then what you're talking about, he's running on protecting a woman's right to choose. That is plus 7%. So across the board, it's the healthcare stuff that seems to be doing most of the work for Democrats here.
Yeah, and voters are only going to learn so much about Tim Walz, right? There maybe going to be 2 or 3 things that he brings to the table where people say, "Oh, great, that's additive to the ticket," right? And clearly, his position on healthcare issues, capping insulin prices, some of the work he did on a program called Minnesota Care, which is sort of like a public option for healthcare in the state of Minnesota. That's very attractive to people.
Yeah.
Again, they're not going to learn too much about Tim Walz. They're only going to think of 1 or 2 things, and clearly the healthcare stuff matters. And those issues that you mentioned are very similar to the top issues we polled on Kamala Harris, that she can talk about Social Security and Medicare, price gouging on goods and healthcare. That was the top of our list for Harris too. So voters are pretty one-track mind on what they want to hear about, which again is why some of this veteran stuff isn't landing.
Well, the stuff that did land in your survey, which I'm not to be too cynical about it, but the worst issue position in terms of preference effect for Walz is he is running on protecting the rights of the LGBTQ community. That's a negative 11 preference effect. And there is a line of attack against Walz, which is that he took steps to allow for the availability of tampons in, I believe, restrooms in public education facilities. Now, I may have that wrong. Please don't check. Please check me on that one. But they've called him Tampon Tim. Saying he's trying to essentially allow for transgendered rights among kids who are in lower education schools. By that, I mean high schools. Why are they not making more of that? Should they be making more of that if you're Republicans, you're just cynically trying to make drive his popularity as low as humanly possible?
Maybe they should, but in the same way that there's only so much room to make a positive case around Tim Walz, there's only so much room to make a negative case around him too. And the Republicans have clearly chosen this veterans issue or his service issue, and how he's represented it as their line of attack. In the same way that Democrats have chosen to isolate JD Vance's stance on women and issues that affect women as really their only line of attack. Although he's on many things as a Republican that are objectionable.
So you think that it's just they've narrowed their focus on the veteran stuff, and I think in relation sort of whether he's a serial embellisher, and that's at the cost of going after him on cultural war issues like stuff like tampons in bathrooms.
Yeah, that's right. And also one of the reasons why it's at the bottom of the list on these this test we get around things that he can talk about as far as his issue positions. It was also at the bottom of the list for Harris. And it's not particularly because voters don't like this stuff or they have, particular hatred for LGBTQ people across the electorate. Right. It's just that they want to learn new things when they hear about these candidates. They assume the Democrats running for office are going to look out for LGBTQ people, right? That's not new information. Right. What they want to hear is, okay, you're going to do something about the price gougers, right? That's good stuff. And I know economists the last few weeks have really had a problem with some of the Democratic positioning on price gouging and things like that. But it's really, really, really popular with voters. And you see them reacting to it in our testing.
So last question, we're going to do an edit cut here if possible. Last question I got to ask you about here is you guys decided, I want to know why you decided to do this, in addition to your interpretation of the results here. But the worst biographical fact, the worst testing biographical fact, Tim Walz drinks Diet Mountain Dew. -11 preference effect. First of all, I think that's not low enough. It should be -15 to -20. But secondarily, why is there so much public angst and antipathy towards Mountain Dew drinkers? I mean, what is going on here? And why did you test this?
We tested all sorts of biographical facts about Tim Walz, right? And it just
does he actually like Diet Mountain Dew? I don't know.
Yes, he does. He does. He is. And okay. It seems to be, JD Vance has been very sort of forcefully communicating his love of Diet Mountain Dew. Tim Walz has a multi-year history that I think most consultants would say an inadvisably public history of repeatedly talking about his affection for Diet Mountain Dew, long before he was ever in consideration for being vice presidential nominee. But again, voters just don't care, right? There are stakes in this election. They're serious. It's about the future of the country. Of all the things you could learn about the vice presidential nominee, who cares what soda he drinks? And this does go to show why it's so silly for Republicans, for JD Vance to do the same thing, right? We didn't test this on JD Vance because we were in the field on that poll before he even started talking about this stuff publicly. But we figured we'd throw it in for Tim Walz. And it's true. Voters just don't care that he drinks this kind of soda. You know what they care about? Price of groceries, price of gas, rents and mortgages, the border security, right? Tell me something you're going to do for me. Don't tell me what kind of soda you're going to drink. Don't play some silly authenticity game. Just tell me how you're going to help me. So that's why it's at the bottom of the list.
I will just say that Diet Mountain Dew is a grocery. Okay, Diet Mountain Dew is a grocery, and the price of Diet Mountain Dew can be shoehorned into the price of groceries. Let's just say that.
That's fair. We'll talk to some people at the World Bank, see where the Diet Mountain Dew index is and how they anticipate it impacting this election.
All right. Well, Evan, I want to say thank you for doing this. These surveys are incredibly instructive. I would encourage everyone to check out the data that is there. We'll try to post it in some form of article or maybe attached to the YouTube. If not, check out Blueprint. And Evan, when you have another one coming out, let us know. We'll get you back on the show. And thanks a bunch, man.
Absolutely will. Thanks again for having me.